This is Algebra 2 Prerequisite Skills Unit on factoring. Today we are going to talk about factoring trinomials and factor by grouping. For factoring trinomials, I'm going to show you a variety of different methods, all with these same two examples, and I want you to end up finding one of the ways that you're comfortable with. And it might take a while for you to become comfortable with one of the ways, but I do want to make sure that you know that there's a variety of different ways to view these and a variety of different ways to actually factor these. So we're going to start off with x squared plus 9x plus 18. These are ultimately the simplest ones to factor when we have our coefficient of x squared of 1. Now, whenever we factor a trinomial, it's going to factor into two binomials. Two binomials means that we have two terms. So we're going to take our trinomial and split it up into two parentheses, and each parentheses has two terms. And we need to figure out what goes where so that when we were to FOIL the two back together or distribute the two back together, we get our starting trinomial. So x squared. X squared, the only way to multiply and get x squared, or the only factors of x squared, is x times x. So those we fill in no matter what. Then you have to look at the last term, this 18, and you have to think, okay, what are your factors of 18? Well, you can have 1 times 18, you can have 2 times 9, or you can have 3 times 6. And you want to figure out the factors of 18 that will add to give you 9. It's whatever sign is in front of the 18 here. So if it was a minus, you want minus to give you 9. This time it's an add, so you want it to add to give you 9. So you look at these three sets of factors. 1 plus 18 does not equal 9, so that will not work. 2 plus 9 does not equal 9. That will not work. 3 plus 6 does equal 9. So we will say plus 3 plus 6. And now we check. So we're pretty sure that this is how it factors down, but you always want to check these until you get really good and comfortable at them. So x times x is x squared. X times 6 is plus 6x. 3 times x is plus 3x. 3 times 6 is plus 18. 6x plus 3x is 9x. So we do have our x squared plus 9x plus 18, which is exactly what we started with. So we know we factored it down correctly. Okay. Now, the second type of trinomial that you're going to see is when we do have a coefficient. Now, when we have a coefficient here, it will not be as simple as what we just did by looking to see which factors of our last number add or subtract to give us the middle. We will have to do a little bit more work to figure this out. So the first method I'm going to show you is the common sense or guessing and checking method. So first off, we're going to need our two parentheses, and your first term here is 5x squared. So you go, okay, what are the factors of 5? Well, the factors of 5 are 1 times 5. So we would have 1 and 5, and x squared is x and x. Okay, so that's the first thing is you're going to write down, you're going to choose one of the factors of your first term. And now we do the same idea. We look for factors of our last term. Factors of 6 are 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. And we now are just going to be guessing and checking. We know that the last terms have to multiply to give us a positive 6, but when we combine them together, we get a negative number. So it's going to be a minus and a minus, and now we just have to start trying. This is where the logic comes in. 1 times 6. Now 6 is a pretty big number, and we want it to combine to give us 13. So I'm not going to start with the 6 in there. So instead, I'm going to start by trying 2 and 3. All right, and you can put them in for any order. And now you try. So your first term, 1x times 5x is 5x squared. 1x times minus 2 is negative 2x. Negative 3 times 5x is minus 15x, and negative 3 times negative 2 is plus 6. Then you look at your two middle terms and see, do those combine to give you negative 13? Not quite. Okay, so something wasn't quite right. So what we're going to do is we are going to try flipping the 2 and 3, and we're going to put them in reverse order and see if that helps. Okay, so that means our middle two terms here will be different, so we're going to get rid of that as well. So I am now going to try putting my 2 in the first parentheses and my 3 in the second. Now I've already multiplied the 1 times 5x to get 5x squared. So 1 times negative 3 is negative 3x. Negative 2 times 5x is minus 10x. Negative 2 times negative 3 are plus 6. Now here, negative 3x minus 10x gives us 5x squared minus 13x plus 6, which is what we started with, so this would be factored correctly. Okay, so like I said, that's the guess and check. You kind of use your logical number sense skills to try to figure out whether or not you did this correctly. Okay. All right, I'm going to now show you another method. So I'll erase this. Okay. So the other method is a method based off of, it's called factox. This method works every time, but it can be difficult to remember the steps. Okay, so there's quite a few steps. So F stands for factor, the A term and the C term, for the A and C. A term and C term, where do those come from? Those come from our general form of a trinomial, which is ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is standing for factor the A term and C term, so factor the first term and the last term. So we'll start with that. So 5 factors to 1 times 5. 6 is either 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. T stands for try. So T, we want to try all the different combinations of factors here that add to give us that 13. So what that means is here we could take 1 times 1 to give us 1. 5 times 6 to give us 30. Do those add to give us 13? No. So then you try it in the other order. 1 times 6 is 6. 5 times 1 is 5. Do those add to give you 13? No. So the 1 and 6 doesn't work. Now you move down to the next one. 1 times 2 is 2. 5 times 3 is 15. 2 and 15, those do not give you 13. So you do in the other order. 1 times 3 is 3. 5 times 2 is 10. Those do add to give you 13. So there we found one that added to give us 13. C, or the O here, stands for circle the largest sum, or the largest factor. So here, 10 is the larger number. 10 was made up of the 5 and the 2. So I'm going to circle the 5 and the 2. And then X stands for cross them. So what I'm going to do is up here, I'm just going to rewrite what we have. So we have 1 times 5 and 2 times 3 working. The 5 and the 2 are circled. So I'm going to set up my 2 parentheses. The 5 and the 2 get crossed. So they get crossed just like so. So the 5 gets crossed right here. We're going to write the 5 down. 2 gets crossed right there. We're going to write the 2 down. And now you just drop everything else down. So there was a 1 here, 1x. 5, we know it's an x. And then there's a 3, so we drop the 3 straight down. The signs also drop down. So this first sign is minus. So this is going to be minus. And we know a negative times a negative gives us a positive. So that's how factox works. Like I said, it's a process, and it does involve kind of memorizing that process, but it will work every time if you're not very good at just logically thinking through it. Okay, we're going to talk about grouping now. Grouping you use for 4 or more terms. Okay, so if you ever have 4 or more terms, you're going to try to group. And what you're going to do is you're going to group the first 2 together and the last 2 terms together. And then you look at the first 2 terms, ax plus bx, and you decide, okay, is there a greatest common factor? There is, x. So you're going to take that x out, and if you take the x out, you're left with a plus b. Now you look at the second group, ay plus by. Is there a greatest common factor? There is, of y. So we're going to take that y out, and we are left with a plus b. Now you go, okay, a plus b and a plus b, that is the greatest common factor. So you're going to take the a plus b out because they match, and you are left with x plus y. So that's factored by grouping. And once again, you can always go through and check to make sure that you did this correctly. A times x is ax. A times y is plus ay. B times x is plus bx. B times y is plus by. That is exactly the same thing we have here, just our middle two terms are flip-flopped, which is fine. So ax plus bx plus ay plus by factors to a plus b times x plus y. Now this is actually going to take us back to this trinomial here, and another way how you can factor these. And you can factor it by grouping. So what you want to do is you can think of your factors of 5, which we know are 1 times 5. Let me just erase this right here. So our factors are 5 over 1 times 5, and our factors of 6 are 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Okay. So essentially what we're going to do here is we want to split apart the 13 into values that would also match with our front or our back factors. So what that means here is 13, ways how we can add to get negative. Ways that we can add to get negative 13 would be negative 12 minus 1, negative 11 minus 2, negative 10 minus 3, negative 9 minus 4, negative 8 minus 5, negative 7 minus 6, and then they would start reversing. So what we want to do is we want to look at these, and we want to find one of these values here that would share a common factor with that 1 or the 5. And 5 is a larger number, so we want to find a value here that would share the common value with 5. Well, 10 does. So we could go, okay, so I'm going to write this as 5x squared. And I'm going to say minus 10x minus 3x plus 6. So here, I split the 13x up into 2 separate values. Okay. Then you go, all right, now I'm going to group. So I'm going to group these first two together, and then I'm going to group the last two. But when you group, you always need an addition sign in between, so I'm going to change this to plus a negative 3x and then group it. Now I do GCF. So 5x squared and 10x have a common factor of 5 and x. So if I take 5x out of 5x squared, I'm left with x. If I take 5x out of negative 10x, I'm left with minus 2. Okay. Next parentheses, negative 3x plus 6. That has a common factor of 3, and since this first term is negative here, we are going to say a negative 3. If we take a negative 3 out of negative 3x, we have an x left. If we take a negative 3 out of 6, we have a minus 2 left. Now, they have the x minus 2 in common, and we are left with 5x minus 3. And that is exactly what we had found factored. Now, if you do it this way, where you try to split the 13x up, if these two factors do not match, then you picked the wrong set over here, and you would have to try again.